Well, good morning to you, Grenada, Carriacou, Petite Martinique, the rest of the Eastern Caribbean. It's exactly 3 minutes gone past the hour of 9 in the morning time. Welcome to The Point for today, the 6th day of the month of January. And of course, my name is Joseph Cadore. We want to say thanks and welcome to those of us just joining us via our YouTube channel, via the World Wide Web at www.gbn.gd, or via our Facebook page. And of course, again, good morning to you, to those that's been with us on Classic 105.5 and 105.9 on the FM band. So we get it ready for To The Point. It is Chief Wednesday, and my guess we were expecting an official from the Ministry of Education, but we have not seen. Maybe they are running late, but what we are going to do in the meantime is that we're going to have ourselves an open line, and hopefully during the course of the proceedings, we will get some word from them. So, given that we were expecting somebody from the Ministry of Education, certainly we would concentrate our open line around issues surrounding education. Certainly COVID-19, when we were first hit by COVID-19 last year, March, it swelled a whole lot of conversations. The education, what next, where to from here, became a topic of interest. Whether or not it's bantering issues from the GUT, issues from the ministry, the welfare of our nation's children. There was a delay to the start of the school year. We resumed. We went quite well, and then it was just about the very day or day after, I want to get it right, when school was closed, we heard of an infection at one of her schools, and then that's in St. School, amongst that is the Holy Innocent School, and then thereafter we got official confirmation that there were confirmed cases in a secondary school on the island. Well, as it is now, there's been a delay of the start of the school year, and certainly the conversation continues. Ministry officials, health officials that they collaborate with, and the GUT, who certainly stands the ground when it comes to what happens to their teachers. The conversation continues. You parents, what do you do? Open line time. You get a chance to chime in and give your thoughts as to where we are. What's the process forward as we consider the lifeline and the educational direction of our nation's children? Good morning, Classic, you alive.
Good morning, Joseph Cadore.
Good morning to you.
And how are you?
I am wonderful as always. And yourself?
That's good. Very good, very good. Very good.
Wonderful. Your thoughts, what's next for our nation's children?
Well, darling, where we are for our nation's children, it is time for us to lead them to God. Joseph, regardless of whether we want to hear it or not, we are in times that are perilous according to the Word of God. Maybe when we read it, we do not understand what it really means, but we are seeing now in the whole world what is perilous times. And this is a time, as the Word of God said, draw nigh to God. He said, when you see these things, look up, your redemption draweth nigh. And I believe in the spiritual realm, there is a concentrated effort by Satan to destroy or to get the children to be away from God, because the children today are the adults and leaders of tomorrow. So if he captures them while they're young, he would have an easier time in controlling them. So parents, teachers, get yourselves to know personally, not just having a knowledge of God in your head, but he said we should know God. We should have a heart contact and communication with the Almighty God. He's our creator. We couldn't be here if he had not made us. And he has made us in his image. And so we could never survive and have a good life unless we reconnect with him. And that's what he said, train up the children in the way they should go. And when they are old, they will not depart from it.
Great.
So this is a time to bring the children to God.
Thanks
Have a blessed Joe, and God bless you.
All the best to you. It's about 8 minutes gone past the hour in the morning time. We're taking a quick commercial break. Quick commercial breaks. I think I'm seeing some of my principals, my guests, they're attempting to log in. I'll take a quick one, and I'll be right back. It is Classic in the morning time. Classic 105.5 and 105.9. Master Control, let's take a break.
Grenada's chief medical officer has ordered that all confirmed positive COVID-19 individuals, their contacts, and members of their household must remain in quarantine or isolation for 14 days. Anyone who fails to comply with this order will be in breach of the Public Health COVID-19 Regulations 2020 and is guilty of an offense. Upon summary conviction, that person will be liable to a penalty of up to $10,000. A message from the Ministry of Health.
Exploring the beaten trails, discovering uncharted terrain, connecting with people and places, giving a renewed appreciation for our flora and fauna. We are out and about. From the crystal white sands of Grandin's Beach to the cascading and majestic tumble of Concord Falls, the meandering of the St. John's River, or our undulating mountain ranges. We are out and about. Saturdays, live on GBN Television, our Facebook page, and our YouTube channel. Out and about, rediscovering the untamed beauty of Spice Country.
Avoid the most common causes of spreading the flu. Cover your coughs and sneezes with a tissue, dispose of it straight away, and either wash your hands or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer.
Coughs and sneezes spread diseases, so cover coughs and sneezes, please. Not with a rag or bandana. They trap germs. When you use the rag again, you put germs on your hands and everything else you touch. When you cough or sneeze, cover your mouth and nose with tissue. Throw the tissue in a bin and wash your hands afterwards. If you don't have a tissue, cough into your sleeve or elbow. Alcohol-based hand sanitizers are also effective in cleaning hands. On the FM band. Welcome back. Murphy's Law, if anything goes wrong, it goes wrong at the worst possible time. But you know what's a good thing about the human spirit, with that resilience that we have, that, you know, we can handle this thing. I want to say good morning, as I did promise you, that as it is Wednesday, where I was expecting officials, and they are here from the Ministry of Education. I want to say good morning and welcome to two wonderful ladies. I think they've become household names. If they were not before, I think they have become household name. You know, somehow COVID has transcended a lot, and individuals who probably operated in the background because they're just the chief education officer, and we probably never really get to see or meet them, or they're the education minister, but we heard of them. Of course, during COVID, we've been wonderfully, we got the opportunity to meet two wonderful ladies, the CEO of the Ministry of Education, Ms. Angella Finley, and the Minister of Education, Emmalin, Pierre. Ladies, good morning. Welcome to the program. How are you?
Good morning to you, Cadore. Good morning to your listeners. We are fine, thank you. I'm fine, thank you.
Wonderful. It is good, and I'm happy that you've accepted the invitation to be here. When I started the discourse, I did, of course, give some background to how we got where we are. COVID-19 has undoubtedly transformed forever our educational landscape. And I know there is a way forward. There's a lot that's been happening. But let's establish first for the nations for where we are. We know that it was announced prior to the start of school that there will be a delay of the calendar year. We know that on Monday there have been meetings taking place. Bring us up to date on what's happening as it relates to the start of the new school year. I'm not sure who wants to take a crack at it first. Baby Minister, you?
Okay, so I would introduce this and then I will allow the CEO to give the details of specifically what will happen on Monday. So, Cado, you are extremely correct. This has been a very challenging time for the education sector. Unprecedented. We've never had to deal with a COVID-19 or anything similar in the past. And so, because this was something that, just suddenly came on, it didn't give you time to prepare. It means that you had to be painting the bus while the bus was moving. Meaning that as we put all the systems in place, all the structures in place, we couldn't stop the bus, right? Because apart from dealing with education, remember, you're talking about managing over 1,700 people on the ground, right? So these people continue to function. So even if you minus COVID from the operation, within the crisis, you still had all of your major operations taking place. And that compounded the situation of keeping things together during that period. But thank God he has been so faithful. We have been blessed. And one of the things we've been blessed with is support from our stakeholders. And I believe the collaboration, the participation, the process in itself, that would have contributed significantly to the level of success that we have achieved during this period. So we went through March to December. And during that period, you actually have to sit back to think about it. We went through 3 modes of operation during that period. Mode 1 being total lockdown, meaning full closure of schools, and we were able to go through that period. Then we went through partial closure of schools, and we also had full resumption during the COVID period. So having gone through that experience of 2020, going into 2021, we said we are going to go one step further, which is having had those 3 modes of experience. Any manager, any leader, any person in a crisis would want to now be prepared for the next crisis. And so we have adopted those 3 modes of functioning, of operation, to be relevant not just to COVID-19, but any crisis that would face the education system in the future. And so those 3 modes were adopted, presented, and our stakeholders, our leaders on the ground, were encouraged that you want to be able to get to that place where as seamlessly as possible, you can move from one mode to the other mode. So in combat mode, you want to be able to move from one to the other. Let's be practical. I'm not going to call a country's name. We have not had the experience, but we have had cases where they go to school on Monday. And by Monday night, they're told you cannot go on Tuesday. So moving from full resumption on Monday to total closure on Tuesday, we have not had that experience of less than a day, less than 24 hours. But we want to be prepared to the point that we are able to shift from mode to mode as seamlessly as is practically possible, case by case. So this is where we are. We've presented this to our stakeholders. And of course, we have now taken the decision, and not Ministry of Education, but we've been guided by the health officials, we've been guided by the Cabinet of Grenada, and we are now in a position to announce which mode we are going into on Monday. that announcement is subject to change at any time. And so we are only saying the mode that we are going to go in for next week, Monday, and the following week, during which time all stakeholders must be prepared that it is highly possible that we can have to move from one mode to the other. The good thing, our stakeholders are now aware of the modes and what is to happen in each mode. So the CEO can now speak specific to the mode that we are going into on Monday.
Thank you, Minister Pierre. Lady Finley, the nation awaits you.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Cadore. Good morning, all the persons within the GBN room and to all persons throughout Grenada, Carriacou, and Martinique. Best wishes for a very prosperous 2021, one where we can see ourselves getting into a more comfortable position, being relieved of all the burdens that are associated with COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this activity this morning. With regards to the opening of schools in the physical space for students, return of students for the Hillary term 2021, we have within the past 2 days had discussions, engagements with the principals, managers, and teachers in charge of our public, secondary, primary, pre-primary schools, the members of the Grenada Union of Teachers, and proprietors, principals, managers of private schools. And I must say those engagements have been very enriching, very rewarding, very cordial. And having gone through all of this, we are in a position, acting on the advice, the guidance of the Ministry of Health, to have students return to schools as of Monday the 11th in a phased manner. So the exit grade of each pre-primary, primary, and secondary schools are to be accommodated in a physical setting on site as of Monday the 11th of January. There is also a provision for schools with a very small population, where they will be able to go back once they share the plans for their accommodation with their district education officers, and it's brought forward and accepted at the Ministry of Education. They would be able to open up to accommodate all students on site. So those are the two provisions that we are looking at for the week of the 11th. For the week of the 18th of January, we are expecting that all schools would again have on site their exit classes, in addition to as many of the other grades that will be where their facility would allow for their accommodation, having due regard for the 6 feet distancing protocol, which the Ministry of Health has advised that we need to revert to. So once a school has enough space and facilities to allow students to operate safely with 6 feet distancing protocol, schools will be able to take back the rest of their students. However, we know that there are some schools, due to a number of limitations at this time, where accommodation of every student every day will just not be possible once we are using that 6 feet distancing. Hence, in those cases, principals are advised, managers are advised to work with their district officers to work out a plan where every child is able to access on-site learning for at least 1 day a week. Now, we know the 1 day a week would not cut it if that goes on for an entire period, because that would only translate into about 20% coverage of the curriculum. And of course, that is nowhere near the 50% pass. So ideally, we would be feeling a bit more satisfied when the situation becomes such where every child can get at least 3 days per week, which would translate into approximately enough time to cover about 60% of the school's curriculum.
Let me ask you though, and we're going to go into the details of it. given the fact, and I think Minister Pierre sort of intimated that, the fluidity, COVID-19 as it is, there's an ever-changing elements to it. When we thought that the vaccine would be here, when the vaccine is here, and we're thinking, you know what, get my Pfizer shot, get my Moderna shot, there's a variance to it. And so every time you wake up, we have to keep tweaking. So there's two elements to this that I want us to be clear, because you said, Minister, I think the important element very often that people may find themselves in a quandary when either there isn't information or there isn't an appreciation and understanding of that which is articulated to them. Now, Ms. Finley, you said, as it is, under the current prescription of what's being offered, it only allows us, in some cases, the issue first of social distancing. There are those that have argued that social distancing is almost impossible. I'm going to say almost, and I'm not an authority in it, but if you, in terms of mingling, it is almost impossible. But the return of school in its regular setting is hinged on that. Given that they've argued that it's impossible to have social mingling within the school setting, how do we really and truly, what is the plan? Because some may argue, well, if there's no social distancing and the return to the classroom hinges on social distancing, is learning, is education within the traditional context as we know it. Some of us assuming that it's all over. What say you? And if no, how do we really achieve that? Because Ms. Finley, you're saying under the best of circumstances where you only would achieve 60% of the learning capabilities.
Allow Mrs. Finley to speak briefly on the protocols, what we expect should happen in a normal, on a normal day in school, read the protocols. But Jerome, this is what makes this situation so complex, because you're literally faced with two choices, and both choices are so very difficult. It is like the choice of shut down the country totally, nobody comes in, nobody goes out, and balancing that against livelihood. How do you raise revenue, right? So if we shut down forever, we're going to have another crisis. Public workers cannot be paid because there's no revenue. That will be a major crisis as well. So then you always have to be balancing. And that balance is now between 100% safety, zero risk, and education. It's it's like what people would say, between a rock and a hard place. And so we are challenged to always be trying to find a reasonable balance as best as we can, guided by technocrats, the health officials, the scientists. We attempt to be always guided by them in terms of the how. So you may find a person say, why does the ministry make a stupid rule as every child cannot go to school? Now, the ministry doesn't make a rule that every child cannot go to school every day. But the ministry says, guided by Ministry of Health, is to reduce risk. There must be 6 feet physical distancing in the classroom. Now, because of that, every child cannot fit in the classroom at the same time on the same day. So Ms. Finley would speak to some of the measures generally that is captured within the protocol.
But before I get to Ms. Finley and the protocol, because the protocol would be specific, but let me ask you, Minister Pierre, for years we've been hearing conversations about the tweaking of our curriculum at varied levels. Does the situation as it is now really and truly, isn't it begging us to reconsider? Because the anticipation is a child, he goes from let's say preschool, he goes up to secondary school, he spends a specific amount of years. You go to secondary school for 5 years. At the end of that 5 years, the anticipation is reasonably that you should have acquired a certain amount, a degree of education. You finish that, you then go 2 years onwards, thereafter university. Right. With all of this in place, and I'm assuming, because I'm looking forward thinking, how does that conversation plays out in terms of external exams, which we have, which I don't want to be very particular, that we're not in direct control of, and how it relates to people, we Grenada, planning for the educational pursuits for what the government needs in terms of our strategic planning, and parents, children saying, I am now in Form 3, in 2 years, I'll be at Tam CC. All of a sudden, the whole thing changes.
Curriculum is always a hot topic in education in there. And so I would say to you, for this reason that you've mentioned, and many other reasons, it cannot just be a tweaking of the curriculum. We have to look at curriculum reform in its widest sense. And so I want to give the commitment again, as I've given on the budget, that COVID, no COVID, this year, we are going to be making some serious intervention with the support of some persons that have been identified, not necessarily all involved in the sphere of education, but we are going to be bringing on board persons who are going to give some special support this year as it relates to education reform. But you are absolutely on track. Curriculum reform has to be a priority this year.
Ms. Finley, the protocol that literally guides everything that happens. Update us.
Right. So with regards to the protocol, I must say, based on what Minister said at the beginning, we have gone through basically 3 possible phases. When we had the first bout of students returning, the first batch of students returning to the physical plant, that was in June of last year, and that was for the Form 5 students to prepare them for sitting off the CSEC examinations. During that time, we had a protocol which catered for 6 feet distancing, restriction to visitors, basically no visitors coming on the compound, severe restrictions there. Persons coming onto the compound was restricted to utility workers, persons dropping off supplies and so forth. So we are now going back to that protocol, the protocol which existed then, and also enhanced, let's say, for the reopening of school in September. So that version which we use in Malcolm's term 2020, this version is what is applicable at this time. Because now we are having students coming in, we are seeing the school-specific schedule. So by Friday of this week, we expect that each school will revisit their and submit to the Ministry of Education their school-specific plan, which will kick in from the week of the 18th. And in that protocol, we also have a commitment from the Ministry of Education to provide added cleaners and monitors to support the movement of students on plant, to ensure that cleaning happens routinely at specific times of the day in keeping with the guidelines which have been set forth by the Ministry of Health. There are guidelines as to how persons should move on the compound, the staggering of break time where the number of students to limit bunching of students on the compound. 2 of the most critical factors in that protocol, though, was the wearing of the mask and the sanitizing along with the physical distancing. We have the 12 feet in place for when students are going to be outside to refresh themselves, eating as much as possible in an open space. No sharing of utensils, no sharing of equipment. These are all things that are in the protocol. So it's a case of just refreshing that document to make it easily accessible to all stakeholders operating within the school environments.
A protocol that is more easily applied at the senior level of school, at secondary level, and more even at secondary, the 4th and 5th form level. In all practicality, I've made my own observation. I've heard people speak that while the protocol, and we understand what the protocol seeks to do, but the reality on the ground is that when we get in there, yes, there is the sanitization, there is the attempt to keep a sterile environment, but very often that doesn't happen. With that, juxtapose that to what the actuality and the protocol, where do we strike the balance? What happens, what doesn't happen?
Okay, and that's why again you're saying it's all about striking a balance with no risk, which means staying home, and some risk, minimal risk when you get in. It's this whole the effectiveness of the protocol has to a great extent rely on the dedication, the astuteness of all persons involved. So we have the cleaners, we have the monitors, we have the teachers, we have the school principals. We rely on that reiteration of the procedures by the parents. So it's the extent to which the protocol is effective relies on the input and the collaboration of home, community, school.
And I'm happy that you're saying that, because the fact that the protocol is written in black and white, but there's so many variables, because I'm hoping, is it a case that the protocol, while it's intended to serve as a preventative measure, it isn't intended to penalize the individuals if for some reason there is failure to adhere or to comply with it fully? Because in a lot of cases, it is almost impossible to comply with it.
Okay, and the regulations from the Ministry of Health does make allowances for persons who may not be able to utilize, let's say, the mask for any prolonged period where they can go into greater distance or wait time out from the classroom to be out there. Now, the real challenge for most schools, I would say, is during the break time when children have to go outside to eat. Being what we are, human beings, social elements, social beings, there is a tendency to want to belong, to identify, to be in close proximity to each other. As you say, that's the risk that is there. When we think of full lockdown, which is the safest, so no chance of coming together because everyone is in their private space at home, there are all the other downsides which are being highlighted by the World Health Organization in terms of what happens to the psychosocial wellness of everybody concerned. The students, the challenges that go along with children being at home and trying to learn, the issue of no internet, no device for students, no electricity for students when they are home, and that long-term effect, the long-term impact of students not being engaged in learning to achieve the various milestones that are set out for the different tiers of education.
25 minutes
so
onto the hour. Just hold for me, CEO. 25 minutes onto the hour. I'm happy that you've touched on the issue of connectivity, because it has, of course, it has been one of the topical issues. The issue of the provision of material for teachers, whether or not that is or isn't the case, whether or not all of the schools are internet ready, and those that are not, persons learning from home, how much that the ministry is providing to support teachers as well as students. We take a quick commercial break. When we come back, that's the direction in which the conversation is going to go. Quick commercial break. It is To the Point for today, Wednesday.
Grenada's chief medical officer has ordered that all confirmed positive COVID-19 individuals, their contacts, and members of their household must remain in quarantine or isolation for 14 days. Anyone who fails to comply with this order will be in breach of the Public Health COVID-19 Regulations 2020 and is guilty of an offense. Upon summary conviction, that person will be liable to a penalty of up to $10,000. A message from the Ministry of Health.
Clock. It is 22 minutes on to the hour of 10 o'clock. My guest this morning is CEO in the Ministry of Education, Angella Finley, and the Minister herself, Minister Emmalin, Pierre. We, just to get you up to speed, literally school in its varied format, as in a staggered, in its phased format, we'll see would actually commence from next week. That is the 11th, and then transition from the following week, and that of the 18th. So you get an appreciation of that. Minister, CEO, and while we want to encourage those of you that's home, you chimed in. You feel free to chime in. While we're at it, though, we have a comment that came in via the Facebook platform, and it says they're asking, what is the use of having teachers back in school, having to travel on the bus, which they're saying isn't safe for
the
them?
voice is breaking, so I have lost you there, Joseph.
Do you think? Sorry. So the question
Yes, I'm not.
that's been asked and an observation that's been made. What is the use of having teachers back to school, having to travel on the bus, which they are certain isn't safe for them, that is a risk? Do you think, and in short, whether or not...
Okay, you have gone again, so I missed the last part of what you were saying. Could you repeat the question?
And that,
if Minister heard and she's able to respond, because I missed the last part of your question.
And I'm happy that we're having those connectivity issues, because some articulated that is the environment, Madam CEO and Minister, that we force ourselves in, and people are questioning. Yes, while we appreciate COVID having forced us in that direction, the argument remains that our internet connectivity structure honestly doesn't allow for that astute and deep sort of program that we want to offer online for our students.
But you're absolutely right, Cadore, on the issue of connectivity, because it would obviously be a challenge, because we don't individually have total control over connectivity. Even when we have internet and we have all of those things, we know that there are challenges. Sometimes nationally, you have a breakdown and everybody is out. But in spite of that, I think we ought not to lose sight of the fact of where we are. Now, there are countries in this region and outside of this region have been very fortunate to be part of a number of those regional and international dialogues. And there are countries that are saying, we have no idea how we are going to be able to bring high-speed internet to our schools. There are countries that are saying this to you now. So we are nowhere ready to even start. In the case of Grenada, fortunately, more than a year ago, we were able to, through the CASIT program, through Digicel's activities, to bring high-speed internet to every school. And that includes preschools, private schools. That high-speed internet is now able to connect both teachers and students. And I always like to clarify this. We're not talking about internet in the IT lab, and we are not talking about internet in the principal's office. We're talking about every part of the school being able to access. So while we may have some challenges in terms of the national grid and the access and so on, and the stability, we have come a very long way. And we're going to continue to work with the service provider, in this case, to do as much. I know Ministry of Works and service provider has been dialoguing, communicating, and of course, we hope that nationally we would have a greater stability in terms of internet services island-wide.
I am assuming, Minister, that conversation that has taken place, is taking place, and will continue to take place, would allow for a strategic positioning where we determine, based on the size of the school population, that maybe this school needs this size pipe in terms of connectivity. Because at the end of the day, because we all know, even at our residential levels, when of course everybody's online, naturally we know what happens, even on the best of networks. So I'm assuming that conversation is actually would take place, and it's going to be specific in some cases to the school population.
And I think that was included in the project. And mind you, that project is over $3 million, a massive national project. I doubt we have very many countries that have gone that way in the region. So it's a massive project. However, there are several factors. So for example, we had one school that was down with internet because a tree fell and there was something that was damaged. In one school, you have somebody, unfortunately, and I hate to have to relate those kind of stories, broke into the school, stole the device, and so the entire school is affected. And then you also have the national problem that we face, all of us, in terms of stability of internet. And that is where I think the service provider need to continue to work with, Ministry of Works to get that part right.
Given that that's the direction, the eternal and forever direction that we're going, has any conversation been had with service providers as it relates to the possible reduction in the cost? Because that over the years has been one of the deterrent factors as to why that addresses persons not being able to afford connectivity.
And of course, government is always in the process of discussing, negotiating, finding ways to make things more accessible and at reduced cost. Exactly the reason why government took the position as it relates to Renlec, and much talk about that, but it's always in that same vein. And history would show that the government did it before as it relates to telecommunication, specific to telephone and access. Even now, the benefits we are reaping. We remember what it was like when we had to make a collect call to the US, or we had to be watching our phone to make sure that the minutes are going and be talking quickly to finish. That was a phase. And government brought us through this successfully, that now we are reaping the benefit. And I totally agree with you. Government needs to continue that dialogue. Where could we further reduce the cost of accessibility, and where could we further reduce the cost so that we can equal the playing field, we can level the playing field in terms of technology and the use for daily living.
CEO, I'm throwing the conversation at you now. And I want to make sure that we get it as correct as we actually wanted to. There's a lot of dynamics in play. There's been the ongoing conversation of the issuance of devices to students and teachers. And we've rolled it back and forth. Well, the GUT saying, well, my teachers ain't doing this because, and we know all of that. Question I'm asking you now, based on the commitment that government gave to providing students, teachers, where are we in that delivery process in terms of percentages? Who have received, who hasn't received? If all has received, can you say so? If not, what is the timetable?
Okay, so thank you for asking that question. Yes, it's a national concern. All stakeholders want to be apprised of that situation. As it stands, for Malcolm's term, every student and every teacher within the public sector, public school system, was afforded access to a device, an e-book, which allows for connectivity on the internet. Okay, the information highway. And that's an e-book, the Learn Book, which also comes with a number of e-books on it. So the Learn Book device. Now, towards the ending of Malcolm's term, we also went into another phase, that of issuing laptops to every teacher within the public school system. Now, there was the agreement with the union to have 6 laptops per school. A maximum of 6 laptops per school. But thankfully, the government has been able to go beyond that. So we have now procured devices whereby every teacher in public secondary schools, primary schools, and preschools will receive a device. Because the secondary school teachers already have a device which allows them to connect on the internet, our first round of delivery of the laptops was to teachers in the primary schools and the preschools.
So let me ask you, let me just cut you there. So my understanding is that the intention is to ensure they get it, but at present, not all of the teachers are in possession of those devices. Because
right.
I've been getting this conversation from, because I've been hearing only recently among the GUT family saying that government is saying that they have, and all teachers they've received, where in fact that isn't the case.
Okay, and that's why I used the word it was made available. There were some teachers who opted not to take a device, and for those if they opt not to take at this stage, as a free moral agent, there's a certain level of latitude which goes with it.
But
so a teacher doesn't feel comfortable to use a device, to have a device, that's a hurdle we cross. But most teachers are in possession of
I seem to have a difficulty accepting that. I mean, we don't want to get into the politics, but you're a teacher. Your role is to teach. You prepare lesson plans. You prepare daily planners, weekly planners. When you go to school, if you don't have chalk and board, you can't deliver. How is it that a teacher gets to negotiate that I do not want a device that is used to impart knowledge onto our nation's children? Who draws the line on that one?
Well, Joseph, we are in a period of, as you said, it's a change that we are going through. And, for some persons, change is not an easy thing to accept. So that's why we also have a period of training and sensitization. And we have a plan in place, working with teachers who are not comfortable, to bring them up to speed, that they can actually realize that valuable tool that is in there, how it empowers them when they have access to a device. So it's a process. There's a plan in place for training and supporting teachers who are in a dispensation where they are not so positioned to embrace technology at this point in time. And I was going to say that as by the 15th of January, every teacher within the preschool and primary school system should be in possession of a laptop. And from we did the first phase of distribution the last 2 weeks of school in Malcolm's term, and from yesterday, the 5th of January, we resumed that phase of distribution. And we are, as I speak, teams are in the field giving out devices to teachers at primary and pre-primary level. And we cannot tell a teacher you must take and you have to. There are a few things in life that we must do. And that's what some philosophers will tell you.
You and I would have a different tone to this conversation if I wasn't on GPN's network. So we can say unequivocally that by the 15th, because that first and foremost, that all of the devices have been procured.
For teachers, yes.
And that by the 15th.
And also now for students of pre-primary school, we have been able to secure, go through the procurement process for devices, which would give most of our students access to a device sometime by February. The first batch is on island. And you see it's all tied to availability of funds, but it's coming in phases. So our first batch of devices for students of the primary school is now on island. And they are going through, the officers are going through the process of checking that they have come to Grenada in a good state. And thereafter, we are moving into the phase of configuring them to be able to start the distribution for students of the primary school. We are not yet in a position to service students of the preschool, but I said it's a phase, and we are trusting that stakeholders, our corporate citizens, and the international donors would reach out to help us to make the dream of having every student with a laptop a reality, or some learning device a reality.
We do have a dream. We're keeping the rest of the clock, though, 10 minutes to the hour. Minister Pierre, on just about the closure of the last school term, we almost got hit by a lightning bolt as it relates to the presence of COVID within the school communities. I remember there was a school in Ladigue, I think it's Holy Innocents. There was questions about the presence of COVID there. And I saw later a communique from, I think, a school in St. David. I don't want to name the wrong school, because I remember a school in St. David. Can you update us on where we are with that? And also, it has been, I've heard in different circles, that in a plan and as effort to ensure the sterility of the school environment, that there's a plan to test all teachers across the nation. Your comments on that, please.
So my comment would be that as it relates to the details of COVID cases, as it relates to the testing process, as it relates to contact tracing, the Ministry of Education is not directly involved in that process. Of course, you would appreciate the level of confidentiality, the respect for people's privacy, and all of those things in terms of dealing with health-related matters. And I suspect that a lot of those things are also contained legally. So it is not a case where the Ministry of Health would publish that Joseph Cadore, Emmalin, Pierre, Angella, Finley, all are COVID positive, and they come from this school, and it doesn't happen that way. So the Ministry of Health manages that, and all of the contact tracing, everything related to COVID-19 is centrally, nationally managed. Now, the Ministry of Health may solicit the support of the Ministry of Education where it becomes necessary. So, for example, Joseph Cadore is the principal of School X, and we are trying to reach him to contact a student in School X. We cannot find him. Could you assist us to do so? Or we needed transportation from the Ministry of Education to assist us to carry 10 students from this school to this location to be tested. Those are the ways that we collaborate with the Ministry of Health. Now, when it comes to decisions and decision making, Ministry of Health would assess the national situation, and the national situation will impact those decisions. Now, within the national situation is the situation with the cluster. So the cluster that you referred to, of course, there were students being tested and so on in that cluster. And so the ministry would say, we have X amount of persons in this cluster, and we are comfortable that they are all quarantined. All of the contacts that are associated with them, we have tested them, they are quarantined, and we are comfortable that we have this cluster under control, which is what was related as it relates to that cluster that you refer to. It can go the opposite way. It can probably go the way of, we have this cluster, we are still contact tracing, so maybe 2 weeks ago, if we had to open school then, we would have delayed it from since then. Because at that time, even last week, based on the activities that the ministry was conducting, they felt that we should have a bit of delay there. And so those are the kind of activities, the monitoring of the clusters, knowing who is in quarantine, who is not. Have we found all of the possible contacts in this cluster? Those factors, I believe, help the Ministry of Health to inform us as to the next step. Whether all schools are closed, whether schools in this parish are closed, whether schools in that parish will be open. We are guided by that kind of scientific approach by the Ministry of Health.
And we can well appreciate it, but specific to the concern, and I said, yes, I understand it's the Ministry of Health that guides that, but certainly we'd appreciate that there's a level of collaboration. And if that's the case, has there been any consideration whether injected directly by the Ministry of Health, supported or given to the support by the Ministry of Education, that would speak towards a drive to ensure that all of the teachers, through whatever process, that there's a testing phase that covers them?
And the testing part of it, you're right, I did not respond to that. So that is also coordinated nationally based on that evidence that the ministry has. So based on the evidence that the ministry has, what I have been able to gather from them, and I'm not speaking here as an authority from the Ministry of Health, but we do engage. As a matter of fact, I attempt to speak to the CEO, Chief Medical Officer, CMO, almost every day, every other day, because I'm interested in knowing the direction that we are heading. And so what I've learned is that the ministry, and they may have indicated that yesterday as well, intends to do as much community testing as possible as part of the general program. That too will include schools, but I cannot say, Joseph, and it probably would be very irresponsible of me to say who the Ministry of Health would test, where they would test. What I can say is that I understand that it would include communities, and in communities it would also include where there are large gatherings, include schools. And that activity will be commencing as part of the ministry's program. So it would not be teachers in isolation. So as part of that, you would have farmers, you would have people, ordinary people, you're on a bus or you're whatever in the community, you can be identified as a possible person that can be randomly tested. So it would be difficult to say just school and every teacher, because I don't believe it will be every teacher or every student. It's random. and so it can be almost any person within the school system.
CEO, I see you smiling.
Well, just in agreement with everything that Minister has said at this point.
I would have been disappointed if you disagreed. we keep our eyes on the clock, and we're almost out of time. The time it runs so quickly. Well, we had to know there's always going to be a national threat. The question of social distancing, sanitization. One of the main challenges that we face is our transport system as it is. We literally get packed like sardines in a vehicle, and that's school children depends on it. As a nation, from a Ministry of Education perspective, how much of a concern is that for you, knowing that every day that, because prior to there was the issue of limited numbers in the bus, there was the question of the essentiality of sanitization. That has gone out the door in most parts. Maybe save just the sanitization that is done just by a few bus drivers. How concerned is the ministry from the CEO's perspective, minister's perspective, if we are in fact, because I know we could put a handle on this COVID issue, how do we contain, minimize it?
We always concerned about any situation where protocols are not being observed. And that includes what happens on buses. But I have to make this point that when you look at the people who are breaking protocols, we have to admit that we have not been very good examples for the children in relation to wearing the mask, observing the physical distancing, and so on. Now, I know that the question is always, how do you get 6 feet in the bus, and if that is sufficient, the way that people, whatever the regulations, whatever the agreed amount that is stipulated nationally, of course, that figure would have come about after reviewing the risk factor, reviewing the situation, balancing the livelihood part of it, people have to get to work, and on top of that, adding the protection. So if you're going to take a bus, you know what the number of persons should be on that bus. And you also know that if you're going to add yourself to that bus, you must be protected, and you want to make sure people on that bus are protected. And we know that we have had some serious challenges there, particularly, and I like to listen to CMO when he speaks about wearing of the mask. He refers to it as one of the most important things in dealing with COVID-19, wearing a mask. So all I would say here, let us set an example for our students. As adults, let us wear our mask in public places, and let us wear it properly, not under the chin and all those places. And let us also encourage them. So we see them, encourage them, remind them that it is important to do so. But we are concerned that there are cases where the protocols, the established protocols, are not being observed, and it is not the wisest thing for us to continue.
I'm going to throw this last one in because we're really out of time. Are you comfortable as a ministry that you are getting the designated support you would expect from the GUT as it relates to how you manage what happens on a national level, and the GUT managing its own internal business, that of the health and safety of its members?
All right, so you love to leave difficult questions for last. All I'll say to this is that I try to understand one thing. And that one thing being that the union has its constituents and the ministry has its constituents, right? And every person, every individual would do everything possible to ensure that they keep their constituents happy, they represent them, they do the best that they can. In the case of the relationship between the ministry and the union, we have a common constituent, being that of teachers. And there are very many cases in which we partner And I'll give a perfect example. We have just completed the Code of Ethics, recognizing that there are some serious deficiencies within the system, and we want to bring the teaching service up to a higher standard. And the ministry and the union has partnered in an excellent way with regards to bringing that document to a completion, and will be released very soon. We have had our disagreements, right? So the union feels that a teacher doesn't go to work, the government should pay. The government feels you did not go to work, the government should not set a bad precedence and pay.
Where
right?
was that, though?
So we've had our
that has been one of the
disagreements.
thorny issues.
We've had our disagreements on things, but I want to recognize the union that in spite of our areas of differences, despite not every policy that we would release, that they would agree and they would support, and we have an obligation to manage. And sometimes in managing, you can't make everybody happy. But in spite of all of this, I have to say we've been able to meet cordially, we've been able to discuss, we've been able to look at issues affecting teachers, and I do want to commend them for this, and that's what I'll say on this matter.
Because they were not too happy with you sending teachers back, having teachers back in the classroom. What in their estimation is...
My son said to me a couple of days ago, Mommy, you used to be happy when you had to wash the dishes. I mean, the point is, we won't be happy about everything. But do you leave the dishes unwashed? Do you leave them in the sink? I said to him, there are some things we might not be happy about doing, but we have to do it because there's a reason why we do it. And speaking about planning, we said that we are going back to plan. I would be very uncomfortable, and I've seen a statement that said some teachers had nothing to do. It would be frightening to think that any teacher in any part of the world, because this is a global crisis, went to school yesterday and had nothing to do. We have a situation where the crisis is not about COVID-19, but the crisis is also about the children who have been affected, children who have had no classes for a very long time during the lockdown period, who are zero when it comes to what they got during the lockdown period, months. And so planning cannot be the same. Planning has to be differentiated. It has to be now catering for those who know, those who don't know, and those who maybe not even interested in knowing. So planning cannot end in a crisis. And so we do have challenges, serious challenges, and I always say I commit. I'm not going to publicly discuss details of the challenges we have with teachers in the system. I commit to that. Now, that being said, we have serious problems with planning that is affecting many of our students. And might I say, Cadore, we celebrate and we talk a lot about the students who get 18 subjects, 19 subjects, all passes. But we need to have more conversation about the children who did not even make it to Form 2. The children who got to Form 5 and up to 5 years, they cannot write one subject. The student who went and they wrote and they could not pass one subject. I am saying collectively as a nation, we are responsible, collectively. But individually, we all have specific roles to play. And if you ask what is the ministry role, I can tell you of one of those things we are doing. But at the level of the classroom, there are things that we need to do. And I always say this at the Ministry of Education, we have to find a special occasion to recognize those specific teachers that have gone way beyond to cater for all learning abilities within the classroom, cater for all challenges, and to cater for all children, ensuring that the objective remains that every child can succeed. So planning in a situation like this becomes critical and cannot end.
For two reasons, I have to end. One, I'm over time. Secondly, I cannot trust myself not to ask you another difficult question. While you ladies are off the hot seat today, hopefully with another time and place, we get a chance to do this all over again. Again, folks, the word from the minister. Yes, we have our differences, but when it comes to the national development, we put those differences aside and we put on our nationalistic thinking cap. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, CEO. Wishing you all the best and what is a no doubt challenging period for all of us as ministry officials, parents, everybody on the whole. I do know it is difficult times. I understand it. All the best to you. Wishing you
Joseph,
all the best.
Is there one word?
Well, you just said it. One word. Go ahead, quickly.
That parents would be informed as to which students are coming to school by the individual schools. They would communicate with them through the established mediums, so that all parents would know, in addition to the exit classes, where other students are going to be accommodated, that will be directly communicated to their parents.
Thank you very much, Minister and CEO. I understand that, and I hope everybody is clear on that as well. Thank you for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, listeners, wherever you are, that's where we bring the curtain during on today's edition of To The Point, and that's where I say goodbye to you for now. I've been here with you from since 6 this morning. Peace and love. JC loves you. Again, reminding you that for 2021, we are attempting to find the best version of ourselves. When we say no more to mediocrity, and we try to find our defined purpose and our destiny. Peace and love. JC loves you. I'm out of here. The man David Moray, the golden child. He's here to take you through the mid-morning.